Part of the other problem is cost. So as a result of this type of data, these so-called concussion helmets cost a lot more on average than the standard helmets. And for a school system that's going to buy 150 helmets, the difference in price here becomes a significant barrier. And so something that we really have to consider, and we have to look at what's the relative value. However, the NFL has taken some leadership in this, and this is where results from a study last year where the NFL and the NFL Players Association proactively tested a bunch of different helmet designs and looked at it for their own standards and singled out some top performers, but basically said all of them that meet the certification standards do a great job in protecting against traumatic head injuries. And so here's an example where the highest level of this sport took a lead in helping to partner with the helmet manufacturers and give some direction to those below them. In soccer, for example, you've seen development of some products like you see down the bottom here, so-called full 90. In soccer, the problem is not players hitting the ball. Everybody thinks that gives you a concussion. It doesn't. It's players hitting each other. It's players hitting the ground. And unfortunately, these products still, I think, are up in the air. There's some data you see here saying 33% reduction. That study hasn't been replicated. And so soccer is trying to make some changes in this, but I think we're still a long ways from having an effective soccer helmet. On the other hand, rule changes and techniques clearly have been a benefit. So in football, it was talked earlier today about using your head as a weapon. Clearly, we've had to have a change in emphasis on coaches. Coaches now teaching athletes to lead with the eyes up. Don't use the head as a spear. See the target you're going to tackle. To move the head and the neck together as a unit when heading the ball in soccer. And something that goes back to Dr. Halstead's remarks today, that the neck muscles really do play a role in helping dissipate force. The higher the level of play, college and pro, they need to strengthen the neck muscles to help support and dissipate that. Pro leagues have been very, I think, proactive in some of their rule changes. If you watch an NFL game now, you can't go through a game without hearing about helmet-to-helmet hits or defenseless quarterbacks. They've made it a buzzword from the top down that they're going to do these rule changes. Major League Baseball, automatic ejections for pitches aimed at the head. Years ago, this used to be called a statement when you threw it and hit somebody else in the head. Now it's called an ejection. So again, governing bodies stepping in and saying we're not going to tolerate this. In the National Hockey League, I'm sure you're familiar with, a lot more frequent penalties now for high sticks, checking above the shoulders. Again, taking a defenseless opponent into the boards. There's some penalties being called there. Well, Craig touched on earlier about, you're laughing at my faculty here. Department of Neurosurgery at Vanderbilt here. I'm actually the one over on the side. But what about medical and legislative oversight? You know, again, lots of attention directed toward football now. And I just throw this out to you so you don't want to become what football has been, which is the front page of Time magazine as the most dangerous game and how there's a crisis in the head injuries. And while this caused a lot of angst and a lot of reactionary change, I think it also was a great opportunity for positive change. And so, for example, the NCAA last year, it modified their guidelines. And they said that a student athlete who has a concussion shall not return to that activity for the remainder of that day, period. Can't go back. And then they have to be medically cleared by the team physician or designee according to a concussion management plan. And so every university I take care of now has to have a concussion management plan on file before the season that says how we're going to process these athletes. This was a major change, a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth, but at the end of the day, everybody did it, and it clearly is going to make the game safer. Additionally, it even specifies the NCAA about who can do this, that you've got to have certified athletic trainers, nurse practitioners, etc. One of the other problems that I was talking about at lunch with a couple of folks is that not every physician, unfortunately, is equally skilled in caring for these athletes with brain injuries. And so you may get someone without experience who sort of makes a reactionary or arbitrary decision that's out of line with current convention. NCAA this year also said that institutions need to make a baseline assessment to each student athlete. And look at this, they actually went into the pains to list, including equestrian events, but lacrosse, pole vaulting, rugby, soccer, water polo, wrestling at a minimum. So they're basically saying, don't just test the football team and think everybody else is okay. Any of these athletes have the potential for injury. If you're going to do it right. Do baselines on everybody, and then do post-injury assessments as we talked about. Even in the state of Tennessee, this year the rules changed. And so TSSAA is Tennessee State Scholastic Athletic Association. Does that sound right, Craig? It's our governing body for high school athletics in the state of Tennessee. And this year they said any player who exhibits signs, symptoms, or behaviors of a concussion shall be immediately removed from the game and cannot return to play until cleared by a healthcare professional. And what they meant by clearance is they actually had to sign a form that says, I've examined this individual and I've determined they're appropriate to return to play. Interestingly enough, they also gave the striped shirts, they gave the referees the authority to remove an athlete from the game if they thought they had been concussed, and force them to sit out for the rest of the game. Unfortunately, they didn't do a lot of training for their officials about doing that, so that's something that we're hoping to help them rectify this upcoming season, because I think the intent is pretty good. One other thing about rules somebody was mentioning earlier about disqualification, and I was thinking about another sport I'm involved in is triathlons. And at triathlons, any course official anywhere on the course, if they see you anywhere on a bicycle without your chin strap of your helmet buckled, you're disqualified immediately, no questions asked. And once I went to an event where we had to park, it seemed like 5 miles away from the event, we're walking, and a friend of mine was literally walking his bicycle and his gear to go, the race hadn't started, to go check in, had his helmet on, didn't have it buckled, and a race official came up and almost disqualified him walking to the event. And he, of course, was protesting, I'm not on my bike, and he said, look, you don't understand, helmet will always be buckled and worn at all times. So they're pretty serious about that among their officials. Public education and awareness, I think, again, you look to what the other pro sports have done. The NFL this year made some public service announcements, 30-second spots, some of you may have seen, and they also on their websites and a lot of the literature pointed people toward the CDC website and said, hey, yeah, this is a major issue. We're going to take it up and make it where we can create some leadership. And I think you look at even some of the other less than mainstream sports that have done that, and my favorite, of course, is the X Games, which to me it's always funny to see some of the attire that is worn by Olympic athletes in those sports. But be that as it may, one part of their attire that's consistent is a helmet. And so those athletes on the X Games who influence a generation of snowboarders and skateboarders all have a helmet on. And that's going to make a huge trickle-down effect on the other participants in their sports, as we've heard about today. So I would tell you that management of sports concussions is under an ever-increasing scrutiny from regulatory bodies, from the news media, and from others. We clearly want to make return-to-play decisions based on standard tools with self-reporting of symptoms, but also some neurocognitive testing. And we can't just pull out one thing, as I said earlier this morning, and say, well, we're going to treat all our athletes this way and use that as our gold standard. We don't know the effects of multiple concussions, and we don't know the lifetime safe number, but we know that you can clearly have delayed cognitive deficits. And so at best what we can do is use good equipment, use good technique, and most importantly, avoid exposure to another head impact while we're recuperating from previous concussions. And this is going to be one of the major impacts we can do. I challenge all of you to think, and the athletes in your discipline, how can they be properly evaluated, and how can you make sure they don't get at risk again before they fully heal. Once again, thanks for having me here, and I'm glad to field your questions.